I'd like now to welcome Dr. Jeffrey Swanson, professor in psychiatry and behavioral sciences from Duke University School of Medicine, Mr. Bob Carey, chairman of the National Defense Committee, Mr. Cole Lyle, executive director of Mission Roll Call, and Ms. Christina Keenan, deputy director of National Legislative Services for Veterans of Foreign Wars of the United States. I appreciate all of you being here today. I ask the witnesses to please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to provide is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you very much, and let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Dr. Swanson, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
A challenging policy dilemma underlies arguments for and against the proposed Veterans Second Amendment Protection Act. On the one hand, private ownership of firearms is a constitutionally protected individual right that is especially cherished by many U.S. military veterans. As a group, veterans are twice as likely to own a firearm as the general population. On the other hand, veterans are dying every single day by suicide with firearms in numbers exceeding the toll of those who perished in war. Each is a preventable tragedy of immense human cost. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in veterans, who are 57% more likely to die by suicide than non-veteran adults, and veterans' greater access to firearms plays a key role in their increased risk of suicide. Veterans are far more likely than non-veterans to use guns, the most lethal weapon in suicide attempts. Approximately 1 in 5 suicides in the United States is a military veteran. So a key policy question is, how do we find the right balance between mitigating risk and upholding rights in designing and implementing legal restrictions of veterans' access to firearms? No firearm restriction policy is perfect, and there will always be errors made in its application to individuals, false positives and false negatives. Is it better for the law to err on the side of preserving the Second Amendment right for more veterans, even if it means that some will die preventable deaths? Or is it better to err on the side of saving more lives at the cost of restricting the gun rights of some veterans who would not have died by suicide anyway? Wherever the lines are drawn to mark out a category of people deemed sufficiently risky to override their Second Amendment right, we should aspire to provide due process protections and opportunities for appeal that are sufficiently robust to offer a meaningful and not overly burdensome chance for individuals to contest their deprivation in an adjudicative process, either by a judicial authority or an administrative officer acting in that capacity. And on that score, the current policy might be seen as a work in progress. It could be improved. We cannot know precisely each individual's likelihood of harming others or self with a gun. We know that some categories of people are generally associated with relatively higher risk. One such category comprises VA beneficiaries found incompetent to manage their VA affairs. The statistical evidence for this is indirect. It would be most informative to bring direct evidence to bear by studying the actual population of veterans with fiduciaries, to quantify their concentration of risk factors for dangerous behavior, and examine their specific suicide mortality rate with and without firearm involvement. Such a study has yet to be conducted. In the meantime, our research group carried out a study designed to estimate risk of suicidal behavior and interpersonal violence in veterans who are most likely to be assigned a fiduciary. We analyzed data on 3,200 post-deployment veterans from the Iraq and Afghanistan war era. We constructed 3 separate indicators of need for a fiduciary in these data, based on cognitive performance, substance use disorder, and acute psychopathology. And we found that all 3 of these proxies for a fiduciary assignment were statistically significantly correlated with suicidal symptoms and interpersonal violence. This third indicator identified a small group of veterans who were on average 8 times more likely than other veterans to have suicidal symptoms and to have engaged in violence. In summary, our research provided evidence consistent with the public safety rationale for the policy of fiduciary NICS reporting. However, I have also concluded that a somewhat analogous civilian policy of reporting incompetent Social Security beneficiaries to the NICS was not warranted. It was overbroad, not supported by evidence, and lacked due process. Policies that restrict access to firearms for people who pose a high risk of harming others or themselves can and do save lives. But in this country, such policies need to find the right balance between mitigating risk and preserving rights. And the current VA policy of reporting to the NICS the names of veterans who are assigned fiduciaries is not perfect. It could be improved, especially if guided by more research. In closing, I have a personal interest in this as well. My late father, a gun owner who served honorably in the United States Navy in the 1940s, was deemed incompetent by the VA toward the end of his life. I was his fiduciary, and I understood clearly why he should not have access to guns. I have also lost 3 members of my extended family to gun-related suicides, and each of them was a preventable tragedy that caused immense suffering for their families and friends. And I'm happy to take your questions and provide further assistance to the committee.
Thank you, Dr. Swanson. Ranking member, I'm recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Swanson, recognizing that no system is perfect, does your research lead you to believe the fiduciary assignment process is a sufficient proxy for a direct determination of dangerousness as it is currently constituted?
I think it's the best we have available now, and I think we need to be careful not to make the perfect the enemy of the good enough as we try to find our way perhaps to a better policy in the future. As I mentioned in my testimony, the evidence for the fiduciary being correlated with risk is indirect. It would be better if we had a direct study of the individuals who have been assigned fiduciaries, and I would be eager to conduct such a study in collaboration with VA. But as for now, the problem we're addressing is that all of the risk factors for suicide and for violence are nonspecific, and they're going to apply to more people who are not going to do the thing we're trying to prevent. Unfortunately, when we balance probability of a poor outcome, we have to think about the consequence we're talking about. So if it's going to be catastrophic, somebody's going to die, someone's life is going to be cut short with loved ones left behind, maybe it's important to have a probability that's going to try to save that life.
And I would agree with you. What do we know currently from the data we do have and the analysis we do have? What do we know about the population of veterans, of beneficiaries assigned a fiduciary with respect to their increased risk for death by suicide?
Again, we don't have direct evidence of the veterans who have been assigned fiduciaries because we haven't studied those individuals directly. What we can do is make an inference based on people who look like them, other veterans. And there, in terms of relative risk, if we think about suicidal ideation in the first 2 proxies we talked about is probably about twice as high. And in the third one, with regard to acute psychopathology, which is having a disorder like schizophrenia that impairs the brain's ability to reason or to regulate mood in the case of bipolar disorder, in addition to that, having been hospitalized as a criterion and having active symptoms. And that, as in terms of relative risk, was 8 times more likely to have suicidal ideation or violent behavior. So again, it's relative risk, and we have to keep that in mind in terms of balancing out the efforts to mitigate risk and to uphold the right that we're talking about, because there is a constitutional right at stake.
So as I would suggest in my statement, would it not be more prudent to wait until we had additional information before plowing forward with the reforms my colleagues are proposing in the bill we're considering today?
I think so. I think in the meantime, it seems unwise to me to simply scrap the reporting policy that's been in place for decades without having something better to put in its place.
Are you calling for the repeal of the Second Amendment?
I am not. I'm prepared to accept the way the Supreme Court has interpreted the Second Amendment and to try to work within the exception in Justice Scalia's statement in Heller that the right is not unlimited, and so it
That's
falls
correct.
to
And
us
in reading
to try
law, in the book Reading Law, Antonin Scalia goes through the developmental process of the Second Amendment, and I think that you're misinterpreting what he's saying. So now listen to me here. You can't do that, and you're actively, willfully, and knowingly subverting the Constitution of the United States of America, and that will not stand with this body, sir. So either you amend the Constitution, which is incredibly difficult on purpose, so you can't willy-nilly change these things. So either you call for the repeal of the Second Amendment or you stop doing this. And you stop doing this. Knock it off.
You're subverting the constitutional rights of American citizens, and you don't have that authority. We do.
No.
That is all I have to say. Yes, sir. Please comment, Mr. Swanson.
I certainly concede that we cannot broadly limit legal access to guns.
Well, then don't.
What we have to do is something more difficult, and that is to figure out who are the people who pose such a high risk of harming themselves or others that it is justified.
Mr. Swanson,
to
you're a
limit their
clinical
Second Amendment
psychologist who's been in this field for almost 40 years, and you haven't figured it out yet? Then maybe you should look at a different vocation, sir.
I think we've made a lot of progress on that score, and I think we
We have
some
not.
evidence.
Veteran suicide's increasing. That's not true. That is not true. We've spent $19 billion in 2023 on suicide prevention, and suicides are increasing.
We need
So
to-
your methodology has been proven to be bad.